Tonight we're really excited to have with us Stella Chao, who's the director of the Department of Neighborhoods in Seattle. And I was just remembering that when I first started getting into this stuff back in 1999, people had told me they were at the cities that were doing sustainable work, and I went to visit them. And Seattle was one of them. And the thing I kept hearing there from people was, you know, our neighborhoods, we have something to say about what happens in our neighborhoods. We even get some financial help sometimes from the city to do things. And I didn't know what that meant back then. Now I know what that means. So Stella Chao runs this program that actually responds to what people want and need. And I doubt they get what they want and need all the time, but nevertheless, it's an attempt. So we're very happy to have you here. And we're very grateful to Councilmember Peter Brown, who made this possible, and to Blueprint Houston for being a sponsor here, and of course to the Anchorage Foundation in Texas, which has funded all of these distinguished speaker events that are getting more distinguished all the time. So, Stella Chao.
Thank you very much for that welcome. So I just wanted to start off by thanking Councilmember Brown, thanking Houston Tomorrow, and the funders for this event. It's really been a great opportunity for me to come to Houston and learn about the way that you guys do things, learn about Houston as a city and some of the exciting potential that you have, as well as some of the challenges that you have. So comparison between cities is a really educational and wonderful thing to do, as long as we don't make assumptions that something that happens over here is always going to be successful in every single place. So we want to take all of this information as a smorgasbord of ideas and wonderful opportunities and pick the type of dinner that you want to have out of that smorgasbord that's really going to be the thing that works for Houstonians, and it's not just about Seattleites. So I am the director for the Department of Neighborhoods at the City of Seattle. I was contacted by Councilmember Brown to come and talk to you about what it is the Department of Neighborhoods does in Seattle. What, you know, a lot of times people say, Department of what? Or what does the Department of Neighborhoods really do? This is the third of talks that I've done while I'm here in Houston. The first time, my presentation at the council committee really focused on the government and bureaucratic aspect of my department and how it fits into the city. And then last night, I spoke to the super neighborhoods, and my focus on that talk was really about different types of tools that we have in the Department of Neighborhoods that enable residents in the communities to really take action on their own in partnership with the government. So tonight, what I thought I'd do is I'd focus a little bit more detail on planning and how the Department of Neighborhoods works with residents around neighborhood planning. So if I could have the first slide. Oh, I do that. Sorry. Okay. So, Department of Neighborhoods, we oversee most of the ongoing activities around civic engagement in the city. Other departments do things, but they're usually task-oriented. There might be a very specific project, and then they'll go out into the community and get some input or give some information to the community. But those are just one-time only types of things usually. The things in the Department of Neighborhoods are ongoing civic engagement projects. What we do is sometimes we have all of these different advisory committees that the Department of Neighborhoods oversees. In Seattle Municipal Code, so in the law, it's actually written into law that depending on certain types of changes in the community, land use changes, the organization that is responsible for those land use changes has to convene a community advisory committee in order to go over all of their designs and their plans and to give feedback on it before the EIS report is filed. So that enables the developers to really have a good conversation with community members to make sure that what they're going to do is really going to fit into the flavor of the neighborhood. Seattleites have this culture of neighborhoods that is really, I think it's unique. We really identify ourselves by our neighborhoods. I was telling a story last night that our superintendent of Parks and Recreation, when he applied for the job, he was hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. And so he was thinking about Seattle. He'd run into these people while he was hiking, and they'd say, oh yeah, I'm from Washington. And he'd say, oh, where are you from? And they'd say, oh, I'm from Magnolia, or I'm from Capitol Hill, or I'm from... And he kept thinking to himself, well, I really didn't do my homework real well, because I thought that I knew all the cities in Washington, but I've never heard of these. And it turned out they were neighborhoods. They were neighborhoods of Seattle. They weren't cities, but that's the way that people identify in Seattle. And so that sets the foundation for the culture that we have and how important neighborhoods are to us. The other thing that the Department of Neighborhoods does is we provide a lot of support for community events, and we're the ones that collaborate with the community members to get the mayor out to the community when there's an issue that needs to be addressed. Maybe there's a multi-departmental issue that community members are frustrated about, or they want the mayor's attention on. Well, we coordinate that with the community members. We get the mayor out there, and we walk the community literally with the mayor, and community leaders point out to the mayor, well, you know, this is really good, that's not so good, we want to let them help on it. So it's really an effective way to get things done. This is an organizational chart for the city and all the departments that we have. So there's about 27 or so departments, but one of the things that isn't immediately visible is that the city council has a completely separate branch of the government that they are responsible for. So city council, we do have a strong mayor program, but the mayor and the council do have independence from each other. And that is a check and balance system. Remember learning in social studies in high school, check and balance of the government and all of that. So the mayor does do, as the executive, oversees all of the operations in the city. But the city council is a place that community members can go to if they don't necessarily agree with some of the decisions that are being made by the executive. Where the Department of Neighborhoods sits is in this area here. It's in a pod, if you will, around neighborhoods and development. And so we work really closely with those other departments that are within that pod. However, everything happens in neighborhoods, right? So whatever happens with the city of Seattle, it's happening in some neighborhood somewhere. So we get involved in a lot of different things. And so we are one of the departments that works with just about every other department on this chart pretty closely. It's a very different relationship than most of the other departments have. So these are some of the programs in my department. We have something called Neighborhood District Coordinators, and the Neighborhood District Coordinators are out there in satellite offices. We have 13 satellite offices around the city of Seattle. And they're the ones that are the eyes and ears on the street for the neighborhoods as well as for the government. So they're that liaison point. They're the place where community members can go to alert the city about issues that are arising in the neighborhood. And they're also the place the city can go to in order to get information out to the community members. They do that partially through district councils. It's kind of like your super neighborhood councils. District councils, there are 13 of them. They are independently governed. They are not city councils. However, it is written into Seattle Municipal Code again that the Department of Neighborhoods has a staff person that provides them with administrative support. So our district coordinators are the ones that support those folks. And I think that that's really good because we're asking a lot of our volunteers out in the community. They put in long hours to steward their neighborhoods. And so if the staff of the city can do the stuff like, oh, I'll get that out to the community and make sure everybody knows about this, don't worry about it. That's the kind of support that community members need. So those are neighborhood service centers, those 13 satellite sites. All of them have meeting space for community members to have meetings at, so you don't have to go looking and you don't have to pay for space out in the neighborhood. 6 of them are also the neighborhood payment and information services. And that means that you can go there to pay your bills. You can go there to pay your electric bills, your water and garbage bills. You can go there to get your animal licenses. They are also places where the other departments in the city will come to us to distribute information. So Mayor Nichols, City of Seattle, he's a big proponent of people in the United States really thinking about the way that we're affecting global climate change. And so there are a lot of initiatives in the City of Seattle about changing our behaviors and the way that we can be a little bit more responsible about global climate change. And so one of the things that we do is we distribute for the public utilities compact fluorescent light bulbs and reusable shopping bags, so people don't have to use so many plastic bags or paper bags. We distribute information when there's changes in the way that garbage is going to be picked up, or if there's opportunities for people to get low flow shower heads and other types of flow restrictors to conserve water. So a lot of that kind of stuff happens also at the neighborhood payment and information services. We also partner interjurisdictionally. We have a contract with the Homeland Security Office and Immigration, and we provide passports at our neighborhood service centers. Instead of going all the way downtown and waiting on that long line at the Federal Building, people can come to these satellite offices on Saturdays or in the weekends, in the evenings, to hand in their applications for their passports. And I don't know how many of you have looked at those applications, but sometimes it's really hard to understand if you've got all of the documents just right. So our customer service reps help people to get those applications completed and put into the federal government. We also have a large key patch community garden program. It's one of the largest and one of the oldest in the country. We have about 70 community gardens across the city. We have about 1,900 gardeners. And one of the really wonderful things about the Pea Patch Community Gardens, in my personal opinion, is not just the fact that it's community members that are revitalizing like empty lots in the neighborhoods, but the gardeners have such a community heart and a volunteer heart that they will take care of extra plots in the garden that we set aside, and they grow the produce and they donate the produce to local food banks. Last year they donated 28 tons of fresh organic produce to the local food banks, and we all know how expensive fresh organic produce is. So it's a really great thing for the whole community to have these community gardens out there. Historic preservation is in the Department of Neighborhoods, and a lot of people scratch their heads and they say, why isn't it like where all the permitting happens and stuff? Because it's kind of a regulatory type of thing. We have some pretty strict rules around historic preservation in Seattle. One of the things that we're really proud of is that we've been able to broker a relationship between Seattle and the National Historic Trust, and they opened up their first, what they call Green Lab. It's an office that's focused on green building with the idea that that preservation is really the greenest way that you can do development. Instead of tearing down that old building and putting it all into a landfill, doing preservation is a really valuable way to stay green. So that Green Labs is the first office of its kind in the nation, and we're hoping that we can really build that up with the National Historic Trust. It's in our department, historic preservation, because, again, it's a check and balance. The Department of Planning and Development in Seattle is the one that makes the decisions on permitting processes, and they have most of the regulations. So this is a way for community members and historic preservationists to say, well, no, this has to be addressed first. We're the experts on historic preservation, and this is not in compliance. And so you have to make sure that this is in compliance before you get a permit to do what you want to do, whether it's tearing down a building or whether it is just renovating a building. There are a lot of different issues. We have 7 different historical districts within Seattle. Each of those historical districts has a community elected board that will make decisions, things like, no, that neon sign on your facade just doesn't fit into the Victorian neighborhood. So things like that. And then they make the recommendation to the Landmarks Preservation Board, which is a volunteer board of experts on historic preservation. Landmarks Preservation Board makes a recommendation to me for a certificate of approval or not. And usually we will go ahead and pass on that recommendation as the final word. I think there's only been one time in the last 2 years that I have made a decision different than the Landmarks Preservation Board, and that was only because the board did not get a full set of information before they made their decision, and more information came up after that. Major institutions like hospitals, universities, things like that, they have master use plans. We have a lot of zoning in Seattle, and master use plans are independent of that zoning because they are such large tracts of property. So they have their own, if you will, zoning plan. Anytime they make an amendment to a master use plan, they have to get a community advisory committee together. And the Department of Neighborhoods is the one that finds those people, we interview them, make recommendations to the mayor for who gets appointed to that committee. The council approves those recommendations for appointments, and then that committee goes through every single step with the planner or the developer until it's ready to be put in for an EIS and a true amendment. Schools also, same sort of thing. When a school closes down, instead of a school just being able to lease out the space for a factory or something, they have to go through a community advisory committee to make sure that the things that they're doing with that school fit with the neighborhood. So a lot of community input here. One of our most famous and most successful programs is the Neighborhood Matching Fund. The Neighborhood Matching Fund started about 20 years ago. It started out as the brainchild of a city council member named, I'm sorry. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. Anyway, it was his brainchild, and he just felt that we had just gone through a neighborhood planning process or just started talking about it. So he felt that community members needed some tools to be able to implement the things that they were envisioning for their neighborhoods. And so that's where Neighborhood Matching Funds was born. Neighborhood Matching Funds has provided over the last 20 years for about 3,500 community-based grassroots projects. And it's equivalent to, I think, $49 million that we've given out over 20 years. And the greater thing is that there is over a $62 million match for every dollar, for every single amount that the city has put out. So the community is effectively matching approximately $1.52 for every dollar of investment. The community is investing $1.52 for every dollar that the city gives to the community for a particular project. The thing that is the thread across all of these 3,500 projects in the city of Seattle is that they're about community building. They're about relationship building. Every single project that I know of says, the people say to me, you know, I never used to know my neighbor before, and now I know everybody on my street. I never used to recognize anybody in the grocery store, but now when I go, it's like old home week, and I'm seeing people, and I've got relationships with them, and you know, I didn't know that there are 10 other families in the neighborhood with kids under the age of 3, and I thought I was all alone as a single mom with a 2-year-old, and now I have a community to depend on. All of these sorts of relationship things, and they go beyond that particular project. The other thing that the Department of Neighborhoods oversees for the City of Seattle is the mayor has an immigrant and refugee initiative. The mayor of Seattle, Mayor Greg Nichols, feels that he talks about how he thinks about his great-grandmother coming over from Germany and not knowing a word of English and being dropped into this country and not knowing the customs and not knowing the laws and the rules, and how difficult it must have been for his great-grandmother to fit in and to be successful. And he feels that it's important as mayor of Seattle to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to create access for our newest residents of the City of Seattle, to make sure that they are successful, because their success means the success of the entire city. I'm going to take a little break here because Councilmember Peter Brown has joined us, and I just wanted to say, Councilmember, that I really wanted to thank you for the opportunity that you've given me to come to Houston and to share things, but also to learn from all of the people here in Houston. You've been able to set up an opportunity for me with citizens information services, assistance services, and I've talked to the Planning and Development Department, and so there's a lot of things that we've been sharing. So I just wanted to take a moment and I might talk here. Thank you.
I'd like to say that we live in a global society, which means there's a reason why Houston should talk to Seattle and vice versa. I think it's very important that we have these kind of exchanges and that we can learn from Seattle, and I hope that maybe you've learned a few things that you can take back to your neighborhoods. And so I appreciate all of you coming. I think it's an interesting prospect to ponder the notion that maybe Houston might have a Department of Neighborhoods and Community Services so that we can be more efficient in responding to neighborhood needs and building a sense of community. I think that's really what it's all about, bringing people together, and as James Jacobs said, maximizing exchange, the very purpose of cities. And you know, that's why we're here in the first place in the city. So I'm very pleased that you're here. We kind of worried we wore her out, believe me, and but we reached a lot of people, and I think this is a very good thing for our city. In fact, the Gulf Coast Institute for a year. I did it. Houston tomorrow. I'll say it again, Houston tomorrow, a great organization which I also support for doing this and many other things to advance quality of life in our great city. So, thank you both.
Okay, transport back to Seattle. So I do want to point out to you, Seattle's got completely different dynamics than the city of Houston. And it's up to you to really think about this, and the things that I'm presenting to you are things that work in Seattle. So the city is long and skinny, and we're much smaller than you. Our population is only about 600,000 people. So we're about, you know, 1/3 to one quarter the size of Houston, right around there. The skinniest point is only about 6 miles wide. The widest point's probably only about 15 or 18 miles wide. the total length of Seattle is only about 25 miles. So we're a very constrained space. We can't go west and we can't go east because there's water on both sides. It's not like there's more land. So it's not like Houston where you've got all that land and all that prairie out there. We have had to really identify strategies to deal with taking growth in a very constrained space while making sure that we have livability in our communities and a choice of different styles of living for the different people in Seattle. So that's why neighborhood planning became a really important thing for us to do. This is an example of our neighborhood service centers, one of the 13. Each one of those different colored squares there on the map is a different neighborhood district. The neighborhood district boundaries were determined by community members in partnership with the city government. So they are where community members themselves identified with a particular group of people. The red spots are where community members couldn't agree which they identified with. And so we just, take it as it comes in those areas. There's just a pictorial representation of some of the things that Department of Neighborhoods does. In the left-hand side on the top, Mount Baker Housing is a low-income housing development. And people there, actually it started out with youth. Youth looked at this really steep slope at the housing development that was full of blackberries and stuff, and they decided to clean it up and make a garden. And when they started cleaning it up and making a garden, all of a sudden the adults got, oh, hey, that's a good idea. And so the adults started chiming in and they helped the youth, and they built this incredible community garden up there where they grow fresh vegetables for all the residents in low-income housing units there. On the upper right, that's an example of one of our mayor's walking tours. We did that walking tour with a whole bunch of different community leaders, and they pointed out areas of public safety need, areas of development need, things like that. And he really responds to these neighborhood walking tours. The other directors in the city of Seattle all confidentially sort of tell you that they really don't like these walking tours, because after those walking tours, the mayor gets in his car and he gets on his BlackBerry and he sends us this red letter envelope email that says, how come it's like this in this neighborhood? Do something about it. And so the community members really do get results. In the bottom left hand is an example of a neighborhood matching fund project that a whole bunch of community members came together in a neighborhood, and they said, we need a park here. This is kind of a dead space in our community. It's really deteriorated. We need to enliven it. We need to have a space that feels safe where our kids can play. And they came together with this huge effort to partner with Department of Neighborhoods, Department of Transportation, the Department of Parks and Recreation, and brought in a whole bunch of other funders. They made Whale Tail Park, which is in the Alki area of Seattle, for those who know. Historic preservation is also about partnerships with community. We partnered with a low-income housing nonprofit around the historic preservation and development of low-income housing here. So the house that's in the front here is an old historic house, and it got incorporated into the design. So we get there at the beginning. We're proactive. We work with the communities and we work with the nonprofits to work it all in the beginning, so there isn't a lot of contention at the end. We don't avoid all of the contention, but I think that we do make a difference in terms of reducing the number of fights that are happening. This is a very successful project. That house ends up being like the entry lobby to the low-income housing units. It's really beautiful. The Fremont Troll is one of our most famous neighborhood matching fund projects for anybody who's been to Seattle. It's this huge concrete troll under a bridge. And he's got his hand on top of a VW bug. And the people are standing there, those are adults standing by his hand. And it was a real contentious project with the city. We had a lot of rules and regulations. No, you can't do this. No, it's under a bridge. The community said, there's trash there, there's illegal activity there, we gotta do something. We've got this great art idea. The artist is willing to donate his design. They fought, they persevered, and they won. And it has turned out to be a really wonderful thing for that whole community. Now tour buses drive by there every single day. People go there and take pictures on there, kids playing on it. It's a really very, very neat project. And it defines the community. So this is another wonderful project that community members did. So in the neighborhood plans, they said, you know, the Capitol Hill and the East Lake community got divided when they put in the interstate. It went right through the middle of the community, and we need to do something to bring those neighborhoods back together. There is a steep slope that goes down to a lake. And so the community started out by coming to the Department of Neighborhoods and asking for money to just put a stairway in. So they put a stairway in, and people started walking up and down the stairs, kind of seeing this empty space and experiencing it on a daily basis. And then they came back and I said, you know what, could you help us work with the Department of Parks and Recreation? Maybe this would be a great off-leash dog park. So Parks and Rec opened up an off-leash dog park there. And then the Mountain Bike Alliance of Washington approached us, and they had this incredible project. They took 2 acres of the property. They worked with all of these different intra-jurisdictional folks here. They were able to get the State Department of Transportation to let them do this. They worked through all the liability issues and got negotiated agreements with all of the different governments. They got money. They got money from us. They got money from King County. They got money from private associations. And they put in 13,000 hours of volunteer time, just digging and putting things in there. And they have pavers. They built all of these mountain bike training tracks, and they're really expert. Before it ever opened, it was being written up in all these mountain bike magazines across the country. So you could go online and you can Google I-5 Colonnade Mountain Bike Park, and you'll see all this stuff come up on it, lots of pictures and videos of people riding the mountain bike trails here. It was an incredible project. It enlivened the area. There's a gathering space, so there are events that happen there. And now, ad hoc, people are teaching mountain biking classes there. And then there's a little store that opened up for, bike services and stuff. So it's really generating a lot of really positive activity in the neighborhood where things were just kind of dead before. Another thing that we do is not a physical project, but a lot of communities complain about chronic public inebriation. Sometimes when people are inebriated, they will be talking loudly, or they'll make a nuisance of themselves. And so it's a problem in the community. We have a real struggle with how we handle it in a respectful and sensitive manner. So Alcohol Impact Areas was a pilot that we started in partnership with the Washington State Liquor Control Board, whose agenda is to sell liquor, with the Seattle Police Department, who didn't want to be locking these people up all the time, with the district councils who were really concerned about public safety issues and small business in their neighborhoods being accessible, with liquor distributors whose agenda was to sell liquor, and with a whole bunch of community advocacy groups, residents in the neighborhood. So an example is Beacon Hill Beacon Alliance of Neighbors. So if you Google that, you'll find a lot of information again on the alcohol impact areas, as well as working with neighborhood business associations. So we've piloted this alcohol impact areas ordinance. I won't go into too much detail, but it's an example of collaboration where we've worked on restricting when people can buy single cans of the high alcohol content products. So if it's like an 8.5% alcohol content product, you can only buy it in a 6-pack between the hours of 6 a.m. and 2 p.m. Because we think that chronic public inebriation is really associated with people sometimes just panhandling just enough money to go buy one and then continuing to drink on the street. But when people buy a 6-pack, they usually go home and they party or they can do whatever they want at home, and it doesn't bother the neighborhood. So it's a pilot. It's been working well. The Centers for Disease Control has just contacted us, and they're wanting to write it up in one of their research papers on what can be a way to work with chronic public inebriation. Key patches, here's just a picture. You take an empty lot that's collecting garbage, maybe collecting illegal activities as well, and you turn it into this vital space, community gathering space, where people are there all the time. It beautifies the neighborhood, and it really is just only positive stuff with key patches. Super neighborhoods, this is really similar. We have community organizations and community councils that feed into a district council, and then each of those district councils send a delegate to the citywide neighborhood council that has various committees, and that citywide neighborhood council works very closely with the different departments in the city of Seattle. Those district councils, they work for some people, but they don't work for the whole population of Seattle. We have about 18% of our population is immigrants and refugees. Even if you think about it beyond that, you think about who's represented on district councils, it's not really reflective of the population of Seattle. We have mostly homeowners on our district councils, but 51% of our population is renters. We have a growing senior population, but really seniors, especially seniors who are limited income, aren't really represented at that table. We have a very diverse disability population, and that disability population is even politically active. We have a really strong deaf and deafblind community, but they don't participate on district council because of the way that they're set up. So youth also, they don't find it a comfortable place. They don't feel like they're necessarily listened to and respected. So we're trying to do different things on working with communities and engaging them. I'll show you a little bit later what those are. We have over 45 official community boards and commissions in the city of Seattle. This doesn't include all the ad hoc groups that are coming up. There's a culture at the city of Seattle where we reach out to community members and community volunteers and say, work with us on developing this policy issue. Work with us on giving your input. People they apply, they're chosen, they're screened to make sure that there's some expertise and some representation across the board. And they work very well with the city of Seattle. So now, neighborhood planning. In the mid-'80s, there was a community group that was very strong in advocating for land use regulations in Washington State, and that's FutureWise. So we were talking about FutureWise the other evening. They went and got the state to pass Growth Management Act because in Washington State, people are very cognizant of the fact that we have some natural resources that are really critical to the quality of life that we all want in the state. The mountains providing water, timberlands providing cover and making sure that those streams that are providing the water are healthy. That water provides us with hydroelectric power so that we can have clean energy in the region. It feeds the whole system along the Puget Sound. Our fisheries are dependent on it. There are a lot of different things. Everybody in Seattle is kind of outdoorsy, or they all want to go hiking. So we realized that if we keep growing the way that we were growing with sprawl, we were going to be depleting all those natural resources in a very short period of time and changing the quality of life that we all want in Washington State. So the Growth Management Act said, okay, we're going to reduce sprawl. Here are the major cities that are already existing. You need to think about how you're going to really urbanize and how you're going to take most of that density. And so the state said, Seattle, here's your growth target. Spokane, here's your growth target. Bellevue, here's your growth target. To keep the development out of the rural areas, to preserve farmland and preserve forests. So, as a result, the mayor of Seattle at that time, Mayor Norm Rice, said, well, we've got these natural areas in the city that are clustered already, where development is happening, where people tend to go, little shopping areas and stuff. Let's just work on this natural thing and give it a little bump. So he brought up this issue of urban villages and urban centers. And he said each of these urban villages and urban centers should be the place that takes the density if we're going to be able to preserve the single-family housing that a lot of us want. So those who like to live in condos and like the hip lifestyle and the activity and stuff can be in these more dense areas, whereas people who want to be in single-family homes can still live in Seattle and live in quiet single-family neighborhoods. So we went through this big process. There was a lot of money at that time. We were in a tech boom. And so the city of Seattle gave each of the 38 neighborhood areas a grant to hire a consultant, a planning consultant. And they hired planning consultants, and they also set up a neighborhood planning office in the Department of Neighborhoods of the city. And each of the staff people in the neighborhood planning office had to work with about 5 different neighborhoods and their consultants on the development of neighborhood plans. These were plans where people started to vision, okay, if we have to take growth, what does it look like? You know, do we really want it to go into the single-family neighborhoods, or do we want to focus it? Do we want there to also be amenities for jobs? What do we want it to look like in terms of walkability? You know, Seattle's a really big bicycling town, so a lot of people started thinking about bicycle lanes and bikeability and safety and bikeability. Is there a school that's nearby in these places where we're going to have a lot more people living? Or what's the demographic? What's the housing look like? Do we have just studio apartments, or do we have 3 bedrooms to invite families in? So there was a lot of conversation around that. The result was that they came up with these 38 neighborhood plans. The council recognized the plans officially, and then took major themes and components out of the plans as input into the Seattle Comprehensive Plan, which was a mandatory thing that the Seattle had to do for the state. And over the last 10 or 12 years, it's been implemented by the government, but also by community members in things like that mountain bike park. Because in the neighborhood plan, remember I said that they said, you need to bring these neighborhoods back together. You need to find a way to reconnect them. You need to find a way to revitalize that. So the community members took it into their hands because there wasn't anything that was being prioritized by government for that space. It was a success. Tons of community organizing, tons of relationship building. About 4,000 people were involved in that. It was inclusive because 4,000 people were involved, but wasn't really inclusive in terms of the way that reflected the people in the community. And no, it wasn't. So there were so many meetings that people joked about. Well, the person that got to write their comments in the plan was the last person standing. There were a lot of barriers. I mean, if you were a single mom and you worked 2 jobs and stuff, there was no way that you could participate because there were so many meetings. If you were limited English, there was no way you could participate because everything just kind of went past you because everything was so fast. The other thing is that, so the city did provide the community with tools and funds. That was really good. However, 38 neighborhood plans were all done at once. And so how much do you think we could find 38 excellent consultants on neighborhood planning at the same time to work on neighborhood plans? So the neighborhood plans, some of them are pretty good, and some of them are not so good. Some of them are really broad, really broad. They say things like, we want walkable streets in our community. And that's not enough of specificity for the government to be able to implement. What do you mean by walkable streets? Do we have to go through another community process to figure out what you mean by that? And then other plans were so specific that they also weren't feasible. We want a stoplight at this corner and a curb cut over there, and it's got to be this wide, and it's got to, you know, and so the transportation planner said, you know, if we put a stoplight there, it's going to really back up traffic. That's what all our traffic studies say, so it's not feasible. So they weren't implementable. So what we want to do now is we are updating our neighborhood plans. Right? So why are we doing it now? Well, there's been a ton of growth. We've taken 75,000 more people. Maybe that's not a big dent in Houston's population, but among 600,000 people in Seattle, that's a pretty big dent. We've got a lot of changing demographics. We didn't have that many immigrants and refugees before. We didn't have a whole lot of the demographic of young people wanting to move back into the city. Opportunities with light rail. We just opened our first light rail this last weekend. I am so excited. I was one of those people who voted for it 3 times. And only the 3rd time did it pass. So anyway, light rail will make major changes in the community that light rail is going. So this is an opportunity for us to revisit those plans and think about how we're going to take growth, transit-oriented development in those areas. We really want to make sure that it continues to be neighborhood-driven, but city-guided to take those plans that were really high level and make them a little bit more specific, and take the ones that were too specific and make them a little bit more visionary. Because what we really want to do is create something that the city can really implement and work with as a guide with communities. We've got a ton of new planning tools that didn't exist the last time that neighborhood plans were done. We now have a bicycle master plan. Just this week, I think yesterday at City Council in Seattle, they were getting community input on the new pedestrian master plan. And we have an urban forestry plan that didn't exist then. We have a Seattle drainage plan that didn't exist then. So there's a lot of different things that are planning tools. We've got to make sure that the neighborhood plans are all in compliance. We also know that there's been a disparate rate of change in those neighborhoods. One of those 38 neighborhood planning areas hasn't moved an inch. It hasn't budged. We haven't taken any growth in housing or jobs, whereas there's another neighborhood plan where even though the target was 2024, that neighborhood has exceeded its housing target by 160% today. So what are we doing here? We really need to revisit it. Regional strategies, this whole new burgeoning area of transit-oriented development. There's a lot more information out there today. There's a lot more expertise. There's a lot more ideas. So we should take advantage of that new knowledge and that new opportunity and look at how our neighborhood plans are going to implement these forward-looking and progressive strategies. Another opportunity is that the mayor has a mandate to make the plans with two overarching principles, and that's inclusivity this time. That means everybody has a voice, as well as sustainability. Let's not think about just how we want the neighborhood to look like, but let's put a new lens on it. How is this a green way? How is this a way for us to move forward into the future that's not going to consume more resources? And that's really important in terms of thinking about how transit really feeds into your neighborhood plan. Do you want bus routes? If you do, where do you place them in your neighborhood? That kind of a thing. He also, 7 years ago, instituted a policy across the city of Seattle called the Race and Social Justice Initiative. He said, it's time for all of us to have an honest conversation about race and to take steps to eliminate institutional racism. So he wasn't talking about necessarily just racism person to person, but policies, procedures that we have in the city that we haven't thought about the negative impacts that they might have on certain communities. We haven't really thought about the disparate impact they have on certain communities who are underserved. So he wants us to step back and also take a look at the way that we're doing neighborhood planning as it relates to race and social justice. So we have, I've worked with a couple of other departments, the Office of Policy and Management and the Office of Civil Rights at the City of Seattle, and we're in the process of developing a budget and policy filter for neighborhood planning. The thing that I think is going to make this budget and policy filter work is that, number one, it's a multi-departmental input, so everybody's got the buy-in at the beginning, and we're going to implement a lot of education with it, teaching people how to use it, what it means, how to think about things. There's 3 pieces to the neighborhood planning filter for race and social justice. One is a process worksheet. How do you actually go about doing neighborhood planning in an inclusive way? The next one is, what kind of data do we have that we really need to look at to make sure that everything is equitable? And the third piece is the actual content writing of the neighborhood plan. As we write these policy guidelines, let's address how they are impacting different communities in disparate ways, and let's take a look at what we can do to mitigate all of that. It's not going to be a silver bullet, it's a first step, it's a try. It's something, though, that nobody's tried before. This is an example of part of the toolkit, how it looks. It's just really a series of prompts that gets people to start thinking. Because a lot of times planners are doing things unintentionally. They are in a mode of this is the way it's always been done. And so we're trying to get them to step back and think about, well, that might be the way it always has been done, but take a look at the way things are now. So is there a different way that we can do it to achieve things that are better for the entire community, not just a portion of the community? The neighborhood planning process right now, lots of community input. We have 2 different things. We have 3 updates that are going on, and at the same time, we are reviewing all of the other 33 plans and kind of doing a status report. So there is a neighborhood plan advisory committee that has been developed, members of all of those 13 different district councils and a few at-large members to create some representation, better representation. We're working with the Planning Commission, which is that volunteer expert group. It's one of those boards and commissions with the city. But they're used to doing a lot of policy making with the city around planning and development. Community forums and workshops. So the Department of Planning and Development is going out there and they're doing the standard outreach with big forums, educating people, getting their input, getting them to think about how they want a vision for their community. But we know now that that doesn't work for everybody. So the Department of Neighborhoods has instituted a new civic engagement model for the city. It's things that nonprofits have done for a long time, community groups have done for a long time, but it's never been done by the city. And when I first talked about it to people in the city, they were really nervous about it. No, I'm not sure we want to do that. That sounds really different. That sounds really hard. We don't know how to do that, so we're not going to go there. But the mayor, because of that Race and Social Justice Initiative, said, sure, try it. Here's an opportunity. So our planning outreach liaisons are what other people might call natural helpers in a community or trusted advocates in a community. They are those folks in the community that are the leaders, the natural leaders that everybody goes to for information. You know, there's that one person in the neighborhood that, oh, you know, Susie will know that information. She's really connected, so let me go ask her. Or they're that trusted leader in an immigrant population. He's got a job, a really good job doing this, and so he knows how things work, so let me go to him. So those are the people that we're working with as our public outreach liaisons. And so what we're doing is we're bringing them in, we're training them a little bit on what neighborhood planning really is about and why it's important for their communities to be involved in it in the future. And then they're going out to their groups and they're having meetings with their groups in their languages at their own venues. Then we're not asking them to come to a city meeting where a whole bunch of policy wonks stand up in the front of the room and start talking to them. We're asking our public outreach liaison to go to their church, their temple, their gathering space, their grocery store, their cafe, and have conversations with their communities in the ways that they always have conversations with their communities. There's a Somali sewing group, and there's a Vietnamese tea group. It's been great. We're getting accolades from all different sorts of people in the community, and so it looks like we're going to be continuing this model. So I've talked a lot. I want to give you a chance to ask a whole bunch of questions. These are some links that I'd like to refer you to if you want to find anything else out about the 38 neighborhood plans or the neighborhood matching fund, which is that fund that community members can access to implement some projects. You can go ahead, seattle.gov/neighborhoods. If you want to know more about that Race and Social Justice Initiative that the City of Seattle has, which has really moved the dial on equity and social justice in Seattle, you would go to seattle.gov/civil rights for their 2008 report on the Race and Social Justice Initiative. Seattle Planning Commission documents the old planning process and how the community was involved. And at the City Council website, Councilmember Clark has a link to the Journal of the American Planning Association, article by Carmen Siriani from Brown University, and he has done a lot of research on the Seattle process for neighborhood planning because it was the first grassroots process around neighborhood planning. Thank you.
Let me just say that this will all be, I assume you'll allow us to put this.
I think that Councilmember Brown's office was thinking about putting this on their website.
Yeah, we will. So we'll do a little report and we'll link to it, and we will also have a video of it. We never actually see that. Do you think we have a video? Okay, good. We'll have a video of the whole thing, and that'll take a few days, but we'll have it. So, your questions and comments?
A quick comment. I was just It was ironic that today that I was reading one of my emails from the Houston Renewable Energy Group blog, okay? And it was talking about someone that visited Seattle and about how terrific it was to be in Seattle. And here I get to see you speak. And it's wonderful what you're talking about. I just wish that Houston, you know, Houston's on the way. With Houston tomorrow, Peter Brown and so forth, we're on the way of making some major improvements, but we've got a long ways to go, and it sounds like y'all are. So I'm giving us a good example to follow.
Well, thank you for the compliment. You know, every single one of our cities has a big struggle that we have to face. Growth is happening everywhere in the United States. We all have a similar challenge around that. And so I'm looking at the things that I've learned from Councilmember Brown's office and the other offices in the city of Houston here. And they are very different challenges that you have. So everything that we do that works may or may not be what works for you, so you got to take the pieces of it that are going to work for you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Two questions. How do you integrate intergenerational input, ownership into all of this planning that you're going on? How do you get the schools involved? Are they involved, the young people involved, and what is their involvement? And how do they get ownership of it? And I'm not sure if you have term limits in the city of Seattle, so you don't. I was going to ask, how do you maintain the ongoing integrity when you have elected officials? How do you keep this going? Is this through policy or through ordinance? The policies that you're talking about now, are they ordinance or can they be changed by a mayor? And are they mandated everybody has to follow them in city council and so forth? Or how is that? How are people made accountable to what you're talking about here?
So the first question was about youth, how we get them involved. So youth, they were on my list of people that were not involved in the first planning process. And it really pains me because the kids, the people who are 18 years old, 12 years ago, are now having families. And they're finding that they can't afford to live in Seattle. And they've got to move from the neighborhoods that they grew up in, that they have all this connection to. And they're really, it's painful. And it's costly for them too because their families are still in Seattle. And they got to do all this traveling back and forth. That clogs up our highways and stuff too. It's not good for anybody. So youth are being involved through a couple of different ways. We're going into certain communities where there are already youth organizations, and we're working with the youth in those organizations. Another thing that we're doing is we actually hired a public outreach liaison, specifically to work with youth. And he went out and he worked with a whole bunch of youth that you wouldn't necessarily think of as leaders in the community, but they have tremendous leadership skills. So we're involving them in community projects, and we're involving them in telling us what they think about their communities. Actually, they're the only group out of the 13 public outreach communities that we work with who were invited by the Department of Planning and Development to present at one of those outreach workshops for the whole community, because they put it together in a video. They put it together in a way that everybody understands, not just jargon and stuff like that. So they're getting their input that way. How we continue to implement these things, the Race and Social Justice Initiative is an executive initiative. So the executive, the mayor, takes a stand and he tells all of his department heads, you have to implement this. It's mandated by my boss. And I've got an accountability agreement, like every other director does, that says that I have to do X, Y, Z. I have to assure that all of my staff go through race training, institutionalized racism training, 3 different trainings. It's recommended, the curriculums are recommended and developed by the Office of Civil Rights. We also have to have specific targets in the way that we're engaging communities. So I have to prove that I am engaging a diverse community in all the activities that my department does. And so the other departments have to do that as well. If the mayor changes, that might change. But the good thing is that he has been able to really turn the dial a little bit on it so that it's part of the culture now. 7 years ago, if you said the word race in a cabinet meeting with the mayor, kind of people would get uncomfortable. They'd shift in their seats and the hairs on the back of their heads would go up. But now, you say the word race, and everybody's wanting to dialogue about it. So it's really different.
Can I just ask one hand of that? Are you doing anything with the education system to incorporate this process so the children are learning this as part of their educational process?
The school district is an independent jurisdiction, so we don't have any authority there. We do have influence, but we don't have any authority. But the Department of Neighborhoods reached out to try and get community groups to work with the schools or schools to work with communities a little bit more.
I think the more we work with our people, they will influence the schools and other things as well. The more you empower the community.
I'm fascinated by your comments about disparate rates of change within neighborhoods and some of the math. I think I've got a real basic question about 13 satellite neighborhood offices and 7 historic preservation districts, 1 master use plan, and 38 neighborhood plans. I think the first question is, of those 13 neighborhoods, is every square inch of the city of Seattle covered, A, and then B, in your observations about Houston's super neighborhoods, do you have any thoughts or suggestions about the disparity in the leverage and influence that our neighborhoods have in city government, and how you might recommend we go forward?
So the districts that are on that map are the neighborhood districts, and so it does cover every square inch of the city. And there's 1 district council for each of those areas, and 1 district coordinator who's a staff person who's supposed to support that council. Whether people actually participate in those councils is a whole other thing. And remember, the council system is set up as a system that really works for the people who've already been engaged with the city. So it's that alternate outreach strategy, that alternate civic engagement strategy that we're focusing on right now and modeling to make sure that there's better engagement for the whole city. So your second question was about, do I see disparate neighborhoods here in Houston? Sure. I mean, it's obvious. Every single city has disparate changes in different neighborhoods. Recommendations, I don't feel that I'm qualified to say that. I'm not Houstonian. I'm not somebody who really understands your neighborhoods and the dynamics of it. That's something that I would challenge you to go out and dialogue with everybody else that's in this room about, because the knowledge, the expertise of what to do is right here in your home. You know, and it's not from experts that come in from the outside. You know, these other folks, like me, we can come in, we give you ideas of what works for us. You're the expert for your community.
Thanks very much. One of the issues that we're struggling with in this community is affordable housing and gentrification and displacement of inner city neighborhoods. What are you guys doing about affordable housing and ensuring that mixed neighborhoods survive in a time of increasing inequality?
Well, there's never enough money for affordable housing development. We're working on it. Seattleites, I keep telling people we're kind of a little funny because we seem to like to tax ourselves in the city of Seattle. So we vote for this levy that is property tax on homeowners to provide money for low-income housing development in Seattle. So that money provides something for shelters and low-income housing, There's a new model of housing first also that is being approached by the city of Seattle. So when people are homeless, they get into this cycle that it's extremely difficult to get out of. And in order to stabilize them so that they can have a chance to be successful, they need to have housing. And so we're not saying now, okay, you need to be completely successful and get off all your drug habits and all your other problems before you get housing. We give them housing first so that they can get out of that cycle. So in terms of affordable housing in the city, we've got a lot of different tools, but you have a tool that we don't have that we wish that we had because our state won't let us have it, and it's tax increment financing. So your nonprofit developers for affordable housing have this incredible tool that would be able to pencil out affordable housing projects when they can bring in HUD money and all of these other types of things. So places like United Way in Seattle, they are very, very helpful to nonprofit housing development organizations in helping them to provide services and affordable housing. So the tools are there. Again, it's about getting together with all your folks and having that dialogue and creating a plan and a vision.
When you were going through all the different things that the neighborhood department does, and I thought it was interesting that there's a school use advisory commission. I thought, we've had an issue here in Houston where schools have been threatened to be closed down, and then you addressed how the school district's another whole entity. And I find it curious that perhaps these neighborhood councils are already organized to then perhaps fight schools being closed down. And I'm curious how the schools got closed down to begin with. But that's kind of another thing I was thinking about, though, this whole race and social justice initiative. I understand that it's mandated within the structure of the city government, and I'm kind of wondering how that plays out in the community themselves. For instance, the whole NIMBY thing, we don't want to have the homeless in our backyard, we don't want to have low-income housing in our neighborhood, but yet why are the people homeless to begin with? Or is the mental health problem is really, this is another thing too, the county starts dealing with mental health issues or with issues of the justice system. And I'm wondering if this race and social justice initiative is kind of spilling over into any coordinated efforts with dealing with broader issues with the county, with the school district, and the communities themselves.
The mayor started implementing a race and social justice initiative as he felt that we need to clean our own house first. So we needed to actually make some steps to clean our own house before we went out to the community and started telling people like the county and the school district and the community to do things in a certain way. What we've been successful at, and it hasn't been easy, it really hasn't been easy to get people onto the same page, and I wouldn't say that everybody in the city is on the same page. But what we do have is a backing, a political will to allow directors and program managers to really go ahead and do that little extra reach out to the communities that are being underrepresented. There's encouragement to do that. There's mandated targets to push you to do that. And so by doing that, we are engaging more people in the community and building their capacity to start engaging with the city. And by building that capacity, that's just going to grow, and that's going to empower those communities a little bit better. In terms of the school district, again, we don't have any jurisdictional power, but we have the influence, and the community does have the influence. So they were going to shut down a couple of schools about 3 or 4 years ago, and the community was in a huge uproar about it. And they backed off, the school board backed off. So the community has power. Community has a voice. What would be better, in my personal opinion, I'm taking my director hat off here, is if the school would have reached out to the community in the first place instead of making the edict about they were going to close X, Y, and Z schools, and really talk to them about, here we have this budget issue. Something's got to come off the table. Work with us and tell us how we can take something off the table. But they didn't do it that way. And so there was this huge uproar, a lot of conflict, a lot of tears, a lot of really nasty words being said. And that really couldn't have avoided. So the mayor has the ability to influence the school district in terms of which schools they're going to close down and to hold the school accountable to what's in the municipal code. It's really interesting because my opinion on this is different than the director of the Department of Planning and Development. And the director of the Department of Planning and Development recently issued an interpretation of that ordinance, saying that if the schools were going to go ahead and use it for these uses, nonprofit, child care, blah, 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 then they didn't have to go through the school use advisory committee process. Well, but the day before, the mayor had had a meeting with the community, and he promised the community that there would be a process. So we had to kind of align it, and they reassured the community that it doesn't matter what this interpretation is, but the city will choose to make sure that the schools have a process to work with the community on it. So that's influence.
Stella, thank you for your presentation today. I am the Houston Director of the Local Initiative Support Corporation, and we help build healthy, sustainable communities by working with neighborhood organizations to revitalize their communities. I'm hanging on to every word that you're saying because we've just launched a pilot initiative to support 2 neighborhoods to go through a community engagement process and a community planning process. It's very exciting, the neighborhoods are excited, and we're encouraging them to use their neighborhood power to engage the city, their elected representatives and their department officials, so that they have those relationships and it's a more authentic relationship. My specific question for you is about the plans that you all have created. With the city funding the plans, are the plans really a to-do list for the city to take care of, or is it a combination of things the city's going to do, but then also the neighborhood is accountable for, with the nonprofits having responsibility for things and the community organizations and individual citizens carrying out parts of the plans?
So some of those neighborhood plans, like I said, they came out with a litany of tasks for the city to do. And like I said, some of the litany of the tasks weren't feasible, and some of them were. So the ones that were went on this kind of priority list. And as things came up in the city where they had funding to do something, or they said, this needs to be done, where do we start? They went back to the neighborhood plan implementation list and they said, oh, well, it's obvious. This community said that they wanted it, we start here. So there were things that were done on those lists. There's actually, there was an auditor's report on neighborhood plan implementation. And that's actually on the city website, sale.gov, if you just do a search for auditor's report on neighborhood plan implementation. It'll come up. It was a report done in late 2007. And basically it said that if you took the 4,200 task items that were identified by community members, and they just kind of chose 100, and they looked at the 100 and they tracked, has it been done, has it not been done? They gave a score of like 9 out of 10 that the city had addressed the issue. Maybe it didn't address the issue completely, or maybe it didn't address the issue in exactly the way that the community had said they wanted it to be done, but they did look at it and address the issue. That isn't to say that everything within the neighborhood plans has been done by far. There's a lot of stuff. And like I said, if it's not on the city's priority list, the community has an opportunity to do it themselves by partnering with the Department of Neighborhoods, and we help to get resources for the community and make things happen. We're all working towards the same thing. We're all working for healthier, livable communities. We all want it to be a successful city.
I'm interested in learning a little bit more about the one or two or three of the neighborhood councils. How does one get to be a member of that council? If you could flesh this out a little bit, how often does the council meet? How many people are in the audience to prepare an annual report? Second, and the question is, what do they do after they come to an agreement that they want something to happen that wasn't in the initial plan? Do they report it through the Department of Neighborhoods, or do they work through their political process? What happens to something they want to make happen? How do they get it done? So kind of the last question too.
So the district councils are self-governing. They meet once a month. Anybody can go to a district council meeting. Each district council has a completely different set of bylaws. One of the mistakes that the city made is we didn't provide a mandated template or a mandated basic list of things. And so they're all very, very different, which has been, there's been a lot of difficulty, a lot of conflict around it, and it's also caused a lot of problems within each district council. So some district councils are really effective and very good and very efficient, and they get what they need. And other district councils flounder, and there's a lot of internal strife, very frankly. And so one of the things that the Department of Neighborhoods has been trying to do over the last couple of years since I came is we've been trying to work with those district councils to give them resources, build their capacity to be able to facilitate the meetings a little bit better. We're offering consultants to them to help them work on their bylaws. I've been trying to convince the city council to amend the resolutions so that there's a little bit more specificity about the bylaws and the expectations of the city council, but we're not there. What the city council did do is they asked the auditor's office again to review the district councils. So the auditor's report on that just came out again, and there's no surprises in it to me. I think that the city as a whole has been inconsistent in the way that we have worked with the district councils. Sometimes we go to them and we say, we want you to vote on this and tell us how your whole district feels about this policy. And other times we say, no, you're advisory. We don't get to vote on anything. Okay? And sometimes we go to the district councils and we say things like, you know what, you can kind of give us a priority of these projects in your community. And other times we say, no, here's the money. You decide how to use the money. So there is an inconsistency at the city that we've got to do some work on. And then the district councils need to do a lot of really hard work on their own things. How they get the effective ones, how they get things done, they know how to work with my district coordinator and push my district coordinator, my staff people, to coordinate around an issue for the whole community. So the district coordinator says if there's an issue around, I don't know, pedestrian safety because new development went up and all of a sudden pedestrian patterns have happened, and the community says, you know, this is an accident waiting to happen, we need a crosswalk or something. So they work with the district coordinator. The district coordinator knows somebody in the Department of Transportation who really knows how to help them. They invite the DOT person to go to a meeting. They discuss the issue. They do a walking tour with an individual. He's the expert. He knows what's possible, what's not possible, what the technical requirements are. He makes recommendations to the community. They come to a negotiated agreement, and it moves forward as a proposal either to the director of Transportation or to the mayor's office if the director doesn't agree with it. And then the mayor makes the final decision about whether that's a priority for the city.
Can I ask a follow-up to the district council?
In the super neighborhoods, there's synergy is formed through the Super Neighborhood Alliance, which is the presidents of all the super neighborhoods that come together. How do you develop that synergy for the whole city of Seattle through your district council?
I don't develop it, it is there. I mean, there is so much culture in Seattle about involvement, and there's these really passionate and intensive volunteers in each of the districts. And so there's this natural leadership that comes in. Our struggle is really around the representation and making sure that everybody is included in those decisions.
So you ever coordinate projects like this council wants to do this and this wants to do that, where you do it together, and how do you develop that kind of synergy? I'm not saying.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So getting them to work together type of synergy. So they used to not work together, and they, at the city neighborhood council, they might work together a little bit, but a lot of times that doesn't necessarily come back to the local level. So what we did the first year that I was working there is we sponsored the city neighborhood council to hold a capacity building workshop, and we invited all of the district councils, and we took up City Hall for a weekend. And we just had specific community leaders that we knew had the skills around different things to do workshop presentations. So we had these little work groups all day long, and we had a report out at the end. And then they were supposed to go back to the district councils and figure out ideas of what they wanted to prioritize and move forward with that. It worked well up until it went back into the community. And then different people had different ideas. And so now I'm trying to build capacity for negotiation and facilitation in the district councils.
What kind of feedback does the neighborhood have had in the development of the Seattle Viaduct?
Did everybody hear that? What kind of feedback has the community had in the outcome of the Seattle Viaduct? So we've got this state highway that runs right along our waterfront. And there are at least three factions of opinions in the city about what to do with that viaduct. And something has to be done with it because it's seismically unsound and we're in an earthquake zone. So one faction wants to just rebuild it. They want to fix it and rebuild it. Another faction says tear it down. It's an eyesore. It's so noisy on the waterfront. You can't hear yourself talk. It needs to go, and we need to have a boulevards, and it just needs to be pedestrian friendly and just have bus rapid transit down there. And the cars and trucks, they'll find another way. And another group says we need to keep it as a corridor for traffic to move through. It's a major arterial. We can't just take it away. Let's do a deep bore tunnel. Remember the big dig? So these are the three different arguments that have been happening. The community had a lot to do with it because there was so much disharmony in the entire city of Seattle about what to do with the viaduct. And there was so much political pressure that, frankly, our city council members, I think, did not do a really good job. They put up a ballot. Instead of making the decision, they said, we're going to do a ballot. And then they made the questions on the ballot really ridiculous. They said, Do you want to have a deep bore tunnel? Yes, no. Do you not want to have a deep bore tunnel? Yes. So it was, you know, we just didn't have an answer after that ballot. So we paid for an election, and it's still, we were at ground zero still. So it's been a long negotiation between the city council and the mayor and the governor and the environmentalists. And right now we have a final decision that the governor and the city council and the mayor agree on, but the environmentalists don't agree on. And that is that we're doing a modified tunnel, not on the waterfront, but inland a little bit. And it's only going to be 4 lanes, it's going to be 6 lanes. And that opens up the waterfront for beautification and a lot of tourism and stuff like that. So, community sort of had a say in the final bit.
That is okay. Thank you very much. We are. Thanks for what you're doing in Seattle, for providing us with a model that we can look at. And it's so interesting that this seems to be about human behavior. It's maybe different from policy. Again, with thanks to Councilmember Peter Brown for bringing Stella Chao to Houston and for sharing with us. And to Anchorage Foundation of Texas, which is also Councilmember Peter Brown, as well as Phone Brown. What?
I would add, David, just in case anyone's curious, the New Partners for Smart Growth Conference for 2010 is going to be in Seattle in February, so there's an excuse for some of us to go see it for ourselves.
Right, and several of us have actually going to be making presentations there. So we're talking about Houston and Seattle. That'll be fun. So turnout's very fun. And I want to thank our staff at Houston Tomorrow, Jay Blazek Crossley and Wendy Nat and Steve Hawley for always making these things work out so well. and to our great summer interns, Kristen Wright, are you still here? I guess, yeah, hi Kristen, and Megan Judeman who greeted you at the door when you came in. So they've been terrific working with us all summer. And I invite you to come tomorrow to hear Uri Oven at the Houston Galveston Area Council. Again, it's free, parking's free. It's hard to beat. Thanks again for all you do to make Houston a better place to live.